Now I invite our speaker, Dan van Esch from Google. A word about Dan. He was our speaker in our earlier seminar that we did in JNU in 2018, I believe. And he was able to present the technologies that Google is actually doing for Indian languages. So he's going to present on Google's language technologies and Indian languages. He's a technical program manager with Google Research USA, and he works on internationalization of language technology, harnessing machine learning and scalable infrastructure to bring support for new languages to products like GBoard and the Assistant. You are all familiar with Google Assistant, and it's widely used. And with so much of linguistic diversity in our world, and of course in India, Dan thinks it is a fascinating research challenge to build technology across so many different languages. With his research group, he has worked on developing smartphone keyboards, transliteration systems, speech-to-text recognition, and text-to-speech synthesis for Indian languages. And there's a lot that you can read about him by just Googling him. You can find about his research papers and articles and his various activities. May I now invite Dan to give his talk, Google's language technologies in Indian languages. He can unmute himself.
I can unmute myself. Excellent. Awesome. A very good afternoon, I guess. I'm very confused with time zones, but I think it is about like 12:15 local time in India. So
Right.
a very good afternoon to you all. And thank you so much for the welcome, and also to the Vice Chancellor for the introductory talk. Very interesting. Let me just put up my slides real quick. And that should do the trick. Okay, now you can see my slides, right? All right.
Yeah.
Yes, the topic today is Google's language technologies in Indian languages, right? And as you might have guessed from the description just now, we actually work on languages around the world, right? Like India is obviously a high priority for us. It's a huge country with lots of languages, but there are lots of different languages around the world. And making technology work in as many of those languages as we possibly can is really critical to Google's mission of making the world's information universally accessible and useful. And our CEO, Sundar Pichai, has also made building for everyone a core value of the company. So when you look at language technology, whether it's in India or elsewhere in the world, we're always looking at it through this lens of making the world's information universally accessible and useful. And of course, that information is stored in a lot of different languages. So, it also follows that we have to make technology work in as many languages as we can. Now, of course, there's lots and lots of languages in our world, right? There's about 7,000 linguists say these days. But actually, 7,000 is still an understatement, right? Everybody has a slightly different voice. There's more than 7 billion people, and there's more than 7 billion different voices, right? When you hear me speak, you will say, look, he's not a native speaker of American English. He has a slight accent. And in fact, I am Dutch. I was born in the Netherlands. My native language is Dutch. And you can tell that, right? So between kind of 7,000 or so languages and 7 billion people, you have countless accents and varieties and so on. And I think when you hear statistics like India having 10,000 languages and dialects, I think it's probably an undercount, right? There are so many different accents and varieties. And so what kind of follows, right, is that there's not really a single cookie cutter approach that works for everyone here. You can't say, look, we are going to build the technology once and then it will just work. You really have to build it for every language, but you also have to understand for the speakers of each language what is going to be the most helpful technology. And in fact, for every individual speaker, you have to wonder what is the most helpful technology, right? You might speak the same language, but like one speaker might be literate and one speaker might not be literate, and different technologies are going to be useful to different people, right? So that's something that we always really care about, like what is most helpful to each user of each language. Now, as the Vice Chancellor was also just saying, smartphones these days have become really widespread. And so if you wonder what is going to be the most helpful, one of the most common requests is actually, look, I just want to be able to input in my language or languages of choice on my smartphone. With smartphones and connectivity now widely available, even 2 years ago, I think when I was in India, 4G was just widely available in lots of places that I went. smartphones and connectivity have really brought lots of new users online. And what they mostly use their smartphone for, right? Initially, it's to stay in touch with family and friends. We have a lot of people doing research in different countries around the world and trying to understand how people use these technologies when they come online. So initially, they use technologies like chat apps, social media, and they just want to stay in touch with family or friends or, employment opportunities. But it's mostly like about that mission of connecting people. But then eventually, when people gain a bit of familiarity, they start sharing knowledge and finding information using search engines or Q&A platforms and things like that. Maybe attending some talks or watching videos. There's lots of ways that people can kind of get knowledge from the internet, right? But of course, historically, most languages, most of those 7,000 or so languages have not been reflected in technology. And this is obviously a problem because if you come online and you have a smartphone, but it doesn't have any content in your language and it doesn't have the ability to, offer you input in your language, then it's going to be a serious usability barrier. Now, as technologists, something we kind of easily jump to is saying, okay, well, look, then we should actually build this technology in all these different languages, right? Which I think is the right direction. But one thing to remember is that it's also a phenomenon that mirrors the offline world, right? So in a lot of these languages where today there is no speech recognition technology, there is no text-to-speech technology, there also is a lack of visibility in the offline world, right? So for example, there might not be a newspaper in that language either. And so this is not something that is new to tech or unique to tech. It's something that needs to be solved, right? But I think it's something that goes beyond tech, and it's a question for society as a whole, maybe, to see how can we make those languages, thrive and support them and so on, right? But all the same, this gap in technological support needs to be addressed, and especially, I think, personally, where literacy is low and voice can really make a big difference in terms of people finding information and sharing information. So you might wonder, what is the process to actually add support for more languages like? And one thing that we find helpful is to think of it as currently kind of a pyramid that we would all like to be more of a skyscraper. Pyramids kind of, have fewer things at the top. Skyscrapers go straight. So let me just walk you through the pyramid. And, the bottom layer of this pyramid, again, that should really be a skyscraper, is that there's about 7,000 living languages in the world today. And that's this bottom layer here. Now, out of those, it's not really clear how many have some written tradition, but it seems to be at least 3,000. We've done some work where we've been able to find at least, I think, 2,500 or so languages written on the internet. And there's probably more, but it's very hard to find them because we don't know what the written tradition looks like, right? We don't know how people in a specific community are choosing to write their language on social media. We do know that they are doing it because if you ask people, are you typing in your language on social media, on chat apps? Usually the answer is yes, we are. And when you ask them, how did you come up with the orthography? They say, look, we just came up with our own spelling system if there wasn't already one. So we think it's more than 3,000, but we don't know where that number actually is today. Now, almost all of those 3,000 are supported by Unicode today. There are some that are not yet supported by Unicode. And, especially in India, where there's a lot of vibrant local communities coming up with their own writing systems, and Unicode hasn't quite added all of them, but most of the major ones are in Unicode. And basically everything that's in Unicode, almost all of it is now supported by Google's free Nodo fonts that you can just go get at google.com/get/Nodo, and the Harfbuzz renderer, which kind of takes these fonts and renders them on an operating system so that they look good. So that kind of gives you the ability to, convey text information and to visually display it and so on. But of course, you also need to be able to display that text. Beyond being able to display it, you need to be able to input it. So today, our Keyboard app on Android has about 900 language varieties. It's called GBoard, and it covers about 95% of the world in their first language. I kind of lost track of how many Indian language varieties we have, but we must have about 100 or so. I think maybe 120. Have a keyboard with transliteration technology where people can just type in the English alphabet and get like Devanagari or Tamil script or whatever out. So that's quite a few language varieties supported already, but still, obviously, there's 6,000 or so that we haven't been able to cover yet. And then currently, kind of the top of the pyramid is speech to text, speech recognition and text to speech. That's available in fewer languages. like about 130 for speech to text and 60 for text to speech, at least when you look at Google's technology. And on top of those technologies, we built stuff like the Google search engine or the Google Assistant or Google Translate. And so that's kind of what the pyramid looks like today. Again, we would like for this to be less of a pyramid, right? Like it should ideally go straight up. And there's a lot of work going on in both academia and industry to, example, at CMU, they are doing a lot of work on making this happen, and Johns Hopkins is doing a lot of work on this. But of course, there's also a lot of industry players, and I know there's lots of Indian universities as well looking at this problem, developing their own text to speech. And I know TDIL has done some of that. CDAC has done a bunch of important work. So there's a lot going on here. For now, it looks like a pyramid, but hopefully soon it will look less like a pyramid. Now, just to zoom in a little bit on India, right? We've actually been working on this specific problem of language technology in India for many years. So even if I take you back about 3 years, which seems like a lifetime ago now, but in 2017, we actually launched machine translation in 11 of India's national scheduled languages of the 8th schedule. So, not just Hindi, but also Punjabi and Bangla and Marathi and Gujarati, Tamil, Telugu, Malayalam, Kannada, Sindhi, and Urdu. Later on in 2017, just a few weeks later, we actually also supported all the 22 scheduled languages in India. And by now, like I said, we actually have more than 100 different languages in India supported in GBoard, which is, I think, the highest number that any keyboard app on Android these days has in India. And then also we enabled voice typing for more Indian languages. And this is just 3 years ago. Obviously, we've been working on this a lot since then. So, some more recent announcements, for example, included the Bolo app, which is also known as Read Along in the rest of the world, because the rest of the world doesn't know Hindi and doesn't appreciate the pun in Bolo, I think. But this is an app where it uses offline on-device speech recognition to help kids improve their reading skills. And it basically works by showing some text that, kids can read. And then on-device speech recognition is processing it. And if you say the wrong word or if you get stuck, then the kind of reading tutor will help you. And this features a lot of stories from the Indian Pratham Books' Storyweaver, which is very cool. So there's a lot of Indian language on Storyweaver, by the way. It's really awesome. So that's one thing. Another thing we have done is live transcribe, which is helpful for the deaf or the hard of hearing. So it basically offers speech recognition where you can just enable it and it kind of captions your conversation. So it's very helpful for the deaf or hard of hearing or anyone that wants to transcribe things. And also in the accessibility space, we've announced 2 other research projects called Paratron and Euphonia, which again are aiming to help technology make technology more accessible for accessibility purposes. So in this case, for people with speech impairments, you can go and search for them on your favorite search engine, and you will find some great demo videos. I won't play them now, but they are very cool. Also, I didn't have time to put this on this slide, but actually we also just recently launched Google Translate in the Odia language with help from the local community through the Translate community. So that was really exciting. So as you can see, we've been thinking about this problem on a global scale, but also building technology and solutions specifically for India, covering lots of different languages and lots of different use cases. One that I can kind of zoom into is GBoard, which I just mentioned. I've worked on this a lot. And like I said, it has about 900 or so language varieties these days. It's actually been very warmly received. So, we don't just support the 22 scheduled languages of India in GBoard. We support some of them with different writing systems. For example, Manipuri can be written in different scripts, different writing systems. And so we support multiple. We have transliteration, and we don't just support those 22, right? We also support Mizo, for example, or many other Indian languages. Overall, there's about 70 unique scripts supported today. And in general, users are very happy when their languages are added, right? It's not that people weren't using their language, they were just using all sorts of workarounds. And so when they don't have to use those workarounds, they're happy. But one problem that we have found is later on when we do follow-up studies with different speakers of the language, people haven't really discovered that they actually do have the ability now to type in their language on their smartphone in their preferred script with transliteration and whatnot. Because people have kind of decided that, it's probably not going to be supported. I'm not even going to look for it anymore. And it's hard to find it in the settings. So we've added some functionality to help with that. You can share these links from the GBoard app. And if you enter this on your Android phone, it will help you set it up very quickly. So you can just add the language onto the existing languages. If you want to read more about this, we actually have an entire technical report that also goes into the Indian situation in quite a bit of detail. It's over on the Google Research website. It's just called Writing Across the World's Languages, so you can search for it. So this is just one example where just building the technology isn't good enough, right? You also need to make sure that it really fits with people's use cases, with what people need the technology for, but also making sure that people understand how to set it up easily, how to configure things, how to actually access it, right? The availability of the technology is no good if users can't actually find it, if they can't use it, if it's too hard for them to use, if you have to go into some obscure settings menu. That is not going to work very well, even if the technology technically exists, right? So that's something that I think is also important to keep in mind. It's not just about building the technology, it's also about making sure that people can access it and find it and use it easily. So that's just one case study. There's a lot more we can say about different technologies, but given that this is a research audience and there's a lot of people watching here, hopefully the next crop of undergraduate and graduate students who are going to help solve the problems that the field still has. We really need you. There's a lot of problems. I just wanted to briefly talk about some trends that you might be interested to follow. You probably already are following them if you're a more seasoned researcher, but if you're newer to the field, just a couple of trends that are worth thinking about, right? So historically, technology was kind of built for one language at a time, right? Like you would build a model for Hindi, and then you would say, look, the model for Hindi is done, and now let's build a model for Tamil, and you would kind of keep going like that, right? But that's not really the most efficient way to build these models, it turns out, right? There's a lot of work now on multilingual models, whether it's for speech recognition or speech synthesis, for translation, for natural language processing. And the reason that this is a promising direction, and I think an exciting direction, especially in scenarios where resources are scarce, as we were just hearing, is also the case in India, obviously, as it is in many other places around the world, of course. With these multilingual approaches, you can exploit linguistic similarities and reduce data needs so that you can add new languages with a lot less data than you would otherwise need, which is very exciting in that mission of getting as many languages, to have technology as we want. And in fact, there's some work now where you can use 0 target language data. I'll talk about it in a little bit. Another interesting thing, I think it's fascinating, is unsupervised machine translation. So historically, when you want to make a translation system, you need to have a parallel corpus, right? So you need to have the sentences in, for example, Hindi, and then you need to have the sentences, the corresponding translations in English. And you would make that translation model by just showing it the sentences in English and then showing it the sentences that correspond to those English sentences in Hindi, and you would build a translation system. But now with recent advances, there's a thing called unsupervised machine translation where it magically, even without any parallel text, it just needs monolingual text, so text in one language in both the languages. It can just make a machine translation system that works fairly decently. And of course, this is exciting because parallel text is relatively rare compared to monolingual text. So that's something I'm excited about. Another direction, also very important, is called federated learning. This is a little new, but basically what happens there is that the device, the training of the machine learning models all happens on the device. It's actually open source in TensorFlow. And if you're curious about how this works, so basically a lot of different smartphones all participate in training one shared machine learning model with enhanced privacy. You can check out federated.withgoogle.com. There's quite a bit of detail there, and Google has invented this technology and published quite a bit of research on it as well. But there's an accessible and easy to follow initial introduction at federated.withgoogle.com. And again, it's open source in TensorFlow toolkit, so you can also use it for your own research. Another thing I think personally is very interesting is accessibility research. I already mentioned Parotron and Euphonia, but also, for example, sign language recognition, right? I haven't really talked about sign languages yet, but of course they are important languages in their own right. And there's a lot of exciting stuff happening in that field as well. In an Indian context, I would be, seriously neglecting the linguistics situation on the ground if I didn't mention code switching, right? Like Hinglish or Banglish or anything like that. It remains a super important area to understand better. And then there's also just lots of research needed on semantics, pragmatics, and dialogue, and there's a ton of open challenges really. But if you ask me what's going to be most helpful in the quest to support as many languages as we can, I think it's probably some of these things that you see here on this slide. And let me just really quickly highlight two bits of recent work from the group specifically that I work on these days. So like I just said, historically you've needed like quite a large amount of audio and text data to build a model in a given language, right? And that's really not ideal because you want to be able to support as many languages as you can, right? So we've been looking at how we might be able to reduce the amount of audio and text data that you need in large, to build like a good model. And so there's these two papers. You can just check them out. They are open access. One of them, led by my colleagues Ai3LT Datta and Anjali Kannan, with Google Speech, they've looked at speech recognition with a multilingual model. So it puts 9 Indian languages into a single end-to-end speech recognition model, and seriously improves the quality with less data. So that's really exciting work. And this is an end-to-end speech recognition model. So it's the latest research frontier also for the field of speech recognition as a whole. So it's very exciting. There's this blog post, and we presented the work at Interspeech last year. So you can go check it out. The other thing, also led by a colleague from the Google Speech group, Manasa Prasad, is to look at building large vocabulary ASR systems for languages without any audio training data. So basically what that looks at is the phonemes, the sounds of various Indian languages are very similar to the sounds of other Indian languages. So why can't you just take the phoneme recognition model from one language and apply it to another language? And you can actually build fairly decent speech recognition systems that way without having any sort of audio data in the target language. There's 0 audio data in the target language that you need, but as long as you have, let's say, a model that's been built for Hindi or for Tamil or for Bangla, you can then kind of take some parts of that model and reuse them for other languages, combining them with text data. So I think these are very interesting directions, and we will see more of this kind of research in the future going forward. Now, as the Vice Chancellor also just mentioned, the ecosystem here is very important, right? This is not just something where a few industry companies are building something. Building successful language technology that works and helps people with their problems requires a very diverse ecosystem, whether it's in terms of the speakers of the language themselves, of course. There's activists and community workers. There's academics, policymakers, industry. There's a lot of people involved in this, and this is one of the reasons that we are also so happy that we have now established a Google AI group in India that is specifically working on all sorts of challenges around language technology. Unfortunately, I have not yet been able to visit because of the current situation, the global situation that we all find ourselves in, but we are starting to work together. We have hired a bunch of people in India now, and they are beginning to do super interesting research. I wish I could be there personally right now even and meet you all in person, as I'm sure it's the case for everybody, but hopefully soon again. But in the meantime, I can tell you about like the open source ecosystem a little bit as well, beyond just the people ecosystem, right? There's also an open source ecosystem. So there's like a lot of third-party Android keyboards these days as well. I already mentioned TensorFlow, our machine learning toolkit, which also has machine translation recipes. You can just use them on Google's Colab, where you even get free access to GPUs if you qualify as an academic researcher. The Nodo fonts that I just mentioned are completely open source, and there's many other libraries and tools as well. But even beyond Google, there's ICU and CLDR, which are maintained by Unicode, and there's a lot going on there. And increasingly, data sets are widely available openly too. So if you are looking for Google created speech data in some Indian languages, you can actually just go to OpenSLR, Open Speech and Language Resources.org, and you can just download data for training speech recognition models or training speech synthesis models. So that's just available there. Another thing that I think is super important, and of course, currently we're doing it via webinars, but I think it is really important that there's a lot of exchange of knowledge between academia and industry, so people can share research no matter where you are in the world. So we've always supported conferences like Interspeech and ACL every year. Interspeech actually took place in India a few years ago. I think it was in 2018, and it was really excellent to see so many people there. So that's something that we are very dedicated to supporting as well, those kinds of exchanges. So I guess maybe just I'll take 5 more minutes and tell you about this one new thing that is really like just hot off the press a few weeks ago. If you haven't heard of it, it might be interesting to you. So like I already said, we have a lot of open source code and machine learning systems and fonts and data sets. But this one data set led by my colleague Brian Rourke is new. It's a set of romanization resources for Indian languages. So if you go onto GitHub, you can just download it. And basically what it is it has, for a lot of languages, it has text from Wikipedia with a romanization lexicon. So it might have like text from the Hindi Wikipedia or the Bangla Wikipedia or the Gujarati Wikipedia or whatever. And then it has those sentences alongside human provided romanized, so transliterated transcripts, which you can use to build like speech, to build transliteration systems. There's also a romanization lexicon that's included. So as far as we know, this is probably one of the biggest data sets of romanized data around, and it's parallel. So you can also use it to build models that go from transliterated English alphabet text in an Indian language into the actual native script for that language. We think this is very exciting. We've used this for example, in GBoard to build the transliteration algorithms in GBoard that are, powering the technology. When you type NAMASTE, it outputs the Hindi equivalent in Devanagari script, right? And so we think it's really exciting. We're happy to be able to share this. There's a paper on this published at LREC, which was supposed to take place in May. In France, we have the paper out on arXiv, so you can just read it there. And like I said, this data set is freely available. It's just on GitHub, so we welcome any papers that use it, and we look forward to seeing what you all do with it. I'm sure there are cool things you can think of that we haven't even thought of yet. All right, so that's kind of all the content that I had. I just wanted to say thank you again to the folks at JNU and everybody who spent time organizing this. I know it's not easy shifting things to online, and so I wanted to thank you all, and thank you all as well for taking the time to come and listen. I'm personally very excited about what's happening in the field of Indian language technology. There's a lot of cool things going on, whether it's research by academics or product development by industry, whether it's large companies or small startups. I've personally had the pleasure of meeting many folks working in the startup ecosystem in India as well. It's been great. I'm just looking forward to seeing what you all do. And that's all I have for now. So I will hand it back to the organizers. I think there's maybe a Q&A centrally at the end.
Yeah, we'll have Q&A at the end. Thanks.
All right.
Thanks, Dan. Thank you so much, Dan, for covering a lot of areas actually in Indian language technology. The work of Google is well known, especially in machine translation, used widely in India. And you said you have done 11 languages. And for the transliteration, GBoard supports all 22 languages and many, many scripts. And also you are working on the code switching, which is a very important area, because most Indians are bilingual, even multilingual, and they switch codes very frequently between English and other languages, or between other languages. So that is certainly a challenge. And with the data set that you just introduced, the Dakshina data set, I'm sure our researchers will be able to download that from the GitHub and try to explore how we can best maybe complement it or use it for our own research. Thank you so much once again, Dan. I know we missed you in LREC. in our webinar. You were supposed to be there, but you could not come because of your shifting, as you said, and you gave a very good talk in our seminar earlier in JNU. Thank you so much once again, and hope this Corona things gets over soon. And when you come to India, would like to invite you to come to JNU. Thank you so much once again.
It will be my pleasure. I cannot wait.
Thank you. But you know, our student works with you, Aisha Banerjee, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. She joined Google a while ago. Yeah. It's always great when like you have more folks joining with like tremendous expertise in the area, right? I mean, obviously I'm Dutch. I've worked a lot on India lately, but I've also worked on many other languages around the world. So it's really good to have the local subject matter experts as well. Like you could just see with the research as well, right? That was all led by folks, you know, from India. Maybe they were not working for Google in India, but like, you know, a lot of research happening with lots of students from the field in India, you know, getting into the research.
Thank you so much once again, Dan. I hope you'll stay till the end, right? It's not too late for you. Yeah. Okay, yep. Great. Thank you. So